Harold Lloyd. In August of 1919, Harold Lloyd was posing for a publicity photo when a supposed prop bomb exploded in his hand, taking his right thumb and index finger with it and leaving him temporarily blind. At the time, Lloyd was one of Hollywood's fastest rising silent film stars, known for his daring stunts and signature glasses. The injury could have ended everything. Instead, it was hidden in plain sight. Lloyd wore a specially designed glove with prosthetic fingers, so convincing that most audiences and even fellow actors never noticed. He returned to the screen less than a year later, doubling down on physical comedy and in jaw-dropping stunts. In 1923's Safety Last, he famously clung to the edge of a skyscraper clock with what looked like both hands. Behind the scenes, only one was fully functional. Hollywood rarely acknowledged physical impairments in that era, and Lloyd's quiet concealment of his injury became part of his mythos. Many conjecture he concealed it not just to protect his image, but to avoid being sidelined in a film industry with little room for visibly disabled performers. Stories also hint that the glove itself became a closely guarded secret on set. Whether by strategy or survival instinct, Lloyd's perseverance didn't just preserve his career, it helped redefine the limits of on-screen physicality in a time when perfection was everything. Montgomery Clift. In the mid-1950s, Montgomery Clift was one of Hollywood's most magnetic leading men, until a single night changed everything. On May 13, 1956, Clift's car slammed into a telephone pole after leaving a gathering at Elizabeth Taylor's Beverly Hills home. The collision shattered his nose and jaw, caused nerve damage that led to partial facial paralysis, and left the left side of his face permanently altered. Taylor, who arrived at the scene shortly after, reportedly stopped others from moving him, fearing it might worsen his injuries. Speculation has lingered about her pulling teeth from his throat to keep him from choking, an image as dramatic as any film they starred in together. Clift returned to complete Raintree County, which had begun filming before the crash. The production crew used strategic lighting, makeup, and camera angles to mask the changes, but the contrast between pre- and post-accident footage remains noticeable. The film debuted in December 1957, and audiences couldn't look away. Hollywood, a machine built on image, seemed unsure how to handle Clift's new appearance. Roles became scarce. Meanwhile, his reliance on alcohol and prescription medication escalated, compounded by chronic pain and the deepening emotional struggles. Yet some critics argue that the trauma sparked a new layer in Clift's performances. In Judgment at Nuremberg from 1961, his portrayal of a traumatized witness earned widespread acclaim. The New York Times called it achingly honest. Some film scholars have speculated that the accident, while devastating, stripped away Hollywood polish and exposed a rawer, more vulnerable Clift. Others suggest the industry simply didn't know how to accommodate a male luminary whose face no longer matched the ideal. Either way, Clift's legacy became inseparable from the wreckage, both physical and emotional, that followed him to the screen. Buster Keaton. In 1924, during the filming of Sherlock Jr., Buster Keaton was struck by a powerful gush of water from a water tower, slamming him onto a railroad track. The scene looked routine, but the impact fractured his neck, a fact he wouldn't discover until much later, after years of recurring headaches and stiffness. Despite the injury, Keaton kept performing his own stunts, never publicly addressing the damage. Chronic pain and reduced mobility allegedly followed him for the rest of his life. Some film historians have speculated that his famously stoic expression, the so-called Great Stone Face, wasn't just a stylistic hallmark, but possibly a way to manage this discomfort without breaking character. Legends whisper that Keaton's refusal to show pain wasn't just personal grit, it was part of a silent era code, where suffering was expected, but never spoken. According to biographer Rudy Blesch, Keaton simply did not complain, reinforcing the mythos of an actor whose body took the hits but whose face never flinched. Jack Elum. A pencil jab to the eye might seem like a career-ending injury, but for Jack Elum, it became his calling card. The damage occurred during childhood, some sources say around age 12, leaving him with a permanently misaligned left eye. In an era when Hollywood prized symmetrical beauty, Elum's look should have been a liability. Instead, it turned him into one of the most recognizable faces in Western cinema. Before acting, he worked as an accountant and studio manager, even tallying books for Samuel Goldwyn. But by the late 1940s, he transitioned into acting, debuting in She Should Have Said No in 1949. Over the next 2 decades, Elum racked up roles in more than 60 films, often cast as twitchy gunmen, crooked deputies, or unpredictable outlaws. His unsettling stare made him a natural villain, so much so that he once quipped he couldn't walk into a scene without pulling a gun. Films like High Noon and Support Your Local Sheriff cemented his legacy. Others guess that his unapologetic embrace of his condition quietly questioned Hollywood's narrow ideals of screen-worthy appearance. Some point to directors who deliberately leaned into his look to heighten tension or add unpredictability. Either way, what many saw as a flaw became a defining trait. And for Jack Elum, the eye that wandered never stopped catching attention. Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi's haunting presence in Dracula, stoic, statuesque, and deliberate, became the prototype for cinematic vampires. Yet behind the theatrical glamour was a man grappling with chronic pain. Lugosi wrestled severe sciatica and back trouble, ailments that grew worse in the late 1940s and into the 50s. Though certain enthusiasts suspect that his famously rigid movements in Dracula came from physical distress, many cinematic historians credit his style to stage methods from his early career in Hungary. Yet rumors persist that the flowing cape served more than mere spectacle. It may have helped conceal stiffness during lengthy shoots. By the early 50s, Lugosi's health woes were magnified by a growing reliance on morphine, initially prescribed for pain relief. Methadone followed, not as a painkiller, but as part of his rehabilitation for substance dependence. His public image suffered, but the larger setback emerged from Hollywood itself, where shifting tastes and persistent typecasting left him on the sidelines. In April of 1955, at the age of 72, Lugosi made headlines with his voluntary entry into rehab, one of the earliest instances of a major star confronting addiction publicly. The press went wild for the story, and while certain quotes attributed to him may tilt more toward legend than fact, his choice signaled a rare moment of openness in a business rooted in make-believe. Despite fewer opportunities and ongoing health complications, Lugosi remained a cultural force until his passing on August 16, 1956. His legacy lives on not just as a terror icon, but as an individual whose physical and personal struggles reflected the darker currents of old Hollywood. Lionel Barrymore. By the mid-1930s, Lionel Barrymore, an Oscar-winning actor and patriarch of one of Hollywood's most famous dynasties, was facing a harsh reality off-screen. Chronic arthritis compounded by multiple hip injuries had severely limited his mobility. After fracturing his hip twice, Barrymore began using a wheelchair permanently. But in a business obsessed with physical perfection, he stayed on camera, and not in minor roles. Rather than sideline him, MGM kept Barrymore under contract, integrating his condition into his characters. Most notably, his portrayal of Dr. Gillespie in the long-running Dr. Kildare film series made his wheelchair use part of the character, an unusual move in an era when disabilities were often hidden or edited out entirely. His performance as Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life in 1946 is another standout. He delivered the entire role seated, with no explanation for the character's immobility. Some legends tease that MGM quietly adjusted set designs to accommodate him, though no studio records confirm it. What's clear is that directors framed scenes carefully to keep attention on his face and voice, still commanding, despite his declining health. Whispers have persisted that Barrymore relied on strong medications to manage the pain, and some biographers mention the use of leg braces during earlier stages of his condition. But Barrymore himself rarely discussed his health publicly. That silence was typical of the time. Studios were known to suppress anything that might tarnish a star's image, and physical impairment didn't align with the standard of a heroic lead. Yet Barrymore's continued presence on screen, despite his condition, quietly challenged the industry's unwritten rules. In a town built on illusion, he didn't hide. He adapted. And audiences, perhaps unknowingly, accepted a disabled actor in a prominent role long before representation was part of the conversation. Walter Brennan. By the time Walter Brennan shuffled into frame in The Westerner in 1940, his distinctive limp had already become part of his screen persona. Brennan often attributed the gait to a combination of injuries, including a hip fracture suffered in the early 1930s. Some sources also connect it to his World War I service, though that link remains more anecdotal than verified. Instead of hiding the limp, Brennan embraced it, and so did Hollywood. Studios started casting him in roles that emphasized his weathered appearance and physical quirks, often depicting grizzled seniors despite Brennan being only in his 40s. His gravelly voice and uneven stride lent his characters a rugged authenticity that distinguished him in an industry still preoccupied with pristine heroes. Between 1936 and 1940, Brennan won 3 Academy Awards for Best Supporting Actor, a record no other male actor has equaled. His third win, for The Westerner, solidified his status as a character actor who could dominate the frame with subtle physicality. Several cinema experts propose that his limp served as a visual emblem of perseverance, symbolizing characters who had weathered life's hardships and pressed on. And while Hollywood scarcely applauded imperfection, Brennan's success illuminated an unspoken reality. Sometimes flaws made a performance indelible. Anecdotes even suggest that directors started crafting roles with his gait in mind, letting his walk speak volumes before any dialogue was delivered. Victor Mclaglin. Victor Mclaglin built his film legacy on brute force and battered features. Before Hollywood, he boxed professionally, racking up dozens of fights, and, according to some accounts, even sparring with future heavyweight champion Jack Johnson in a 1909 exhibition. Whether myth or memory, the story stuck, much like the damage to Mclaglin's face. His cauliflower ear and visibly weathered features weren't hidden, they became trademarks. Unlike contemporaries who sought surgical polish, Mclaglin kept the scars. Directors like John Ford capitalized on his raw presence, casting him in roles that demanded more grit than glamour. By the early 1930s, Mclaglin had transitioned from silent films to sound pictures with ease, often portraying soldiers, ex-cons, or hardened men with haunted pasts. In 1935, he won the Academy Award for Best Actor for The Informer, playing a tormented Irish rebel. Some critics argued that it wasn't just his acting. It was the life etched into his face that made the role believable. Rumors swirled that Mclaglin's refusal to alter his appearance wasn't stubbornness, but strategy. In an industry obsessed with symmetry, he stood out by doing the opposite. That face wasn't studio approved. It was earned. Peter Lorre. In 1931, Peter Lorre stunned German audiences with his breakout role in Fritz Lang's M, portraying a tormented child murderer. The performance was unforgettable, but so was his face. Lorre's naturally prominent eyes, often mistaken for a medical condition, became his trademark. While some speculated he suffered from exophthalmos, no diagnosis was ever confirmed. His intense gaze, paired with a soft, accented voice, gave him an edge that Hollywood couldn't ignore. By 1934, Lorre had arrived in the United States, and studios quickly began casting him in roles that leaned into his eerie visual appeal. From the slippery Ugarte in Casablanca to the jittery Dr. Einstein in Arsenic and Old Lace, he was frequently typecast as unstable outsiders. Directors didn't just use his look, they built entire moods around it. Biographers have hinted that Lorre may have been self-conscious about his appearance, especially in an industry obsessed with conventional beauty. Some dare to guess that this inner conflict added fuel to his performances, layering menace with vulnerability. Whether true or not, the rumor adds a haunting dimension to his legacy. Throughout the 1940s and 50s, Lorre became a staple of noir and horror, his face instantly recognizable even in silhouette. In an era that often sidelined those who didn't conform to the leading actor archetype, Peter Lorre carved out a space that was entirely his own, one unforgettable stare at a time. Ernest Borgnine. Ernest Borgnine's nose didn't fit the Hollywood mold, and that was exactly what made it memorable. Flattened and broad, it became one of his most recognizable features. A number of people suspect that years of Navy boxing during his service from 1935 to 1941, and again after Pearl Harbor until 1945, may have reshaped it. While Borgnine never confirmed that tale outright, the rumor stuck, adding a layer of grit to his already rugged image. In a city fixated on pristine aesthetics and refined style, his face offered something different: sincerity. Directors like Delbert Mann saw that edge as cinematic gold. Ernest's breakout role in Marty, a modest Bronx butcher with a soft heart, earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor in 1955. His unvarnished appearance wasn't a liability, it was the character. Industry insiders often remarked on his ability to convey vulnerability through a hardened shell, a contrast that became his trademark. Borgnine himself embraced the narrative, often joking about his looks and suggesting that what he lacked in classic beauty, he made up for in character. Insiders claim that his face spoke volumes before he ever said a word. and in post-war America, that unspoken story resonated. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.